In this video, we're talking about 3 ways to reduce burnout in your volunteers.
We are Ted and Lisa Snyder, nonprofit consultants, because we believe a better world needs healthier nonprofits. Burnout is an issue that plagues all sorts of organizations, and especially nonprofits, because we are dealing with such massive social issues that we are trying to help, that we're trying to solve. And you're dealing with a lot of volunteers and staff that may or may not be paid at a similar level to other positions in other industries. So we want to really be careful about protecting the health, not just of ourselves. I think people are pretty good about recognizing when they need boundaries, but how can we actually help reduce the burnout in our volunteers and in the people that we're leading?
First of all, know about them enough to see the early signs.
Yes.
Obviously, there are signs that people are getting burnt out. Maybe they're becoming more like emotionally raw when they're there volunteering. Maybe they're a little more angry, a little more distant, a little more not putting as much effort or passion into volunteering the way that they used to. I think we can all recognize the early signs, but where a lot of nonprofit leaders fall short is they distance themselves too much from the volunteers, so they can't even get a read on people. They can't even get a read on how the organization is feeling and how these volunteers are doing. So it's very important to know about your volunteers enough to be able to even see the early signs. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a larger organization and you have a bunch of volunteers, like 100, 200 volunteers, that is unrealistic to expect one leader to be able to keep tabs on that many people. So then it's really important to have good hierarchical and leadership structures in place so that the volunteers are being cared for as well as managed well. I think a lot of nonprofit leaders see volunteers and just kind of like, okay, cool, let's manage this. Let's make sure that things are kind of organized and we're doing stuff, and forget about the human element. And especially when we're dealing with nonprofits, one of the reasons that they're there is the human element. And if you remove that and you're not keeping tabs on that, pretty soon they're going to start thinking, why am I doing this? I am running out of energy. My battery is getting real low.
Yeah.
Not a good thing.
And with the hierarchical structures, you have the staff person, or maybe it's you, a leader over some of the volunteers who might actually be a volunteer themselves. But the way that you train that the organization cares about volunteers not experiencing burnout is that the leader at the top and the leaders in the middle of the organization are actually showing that they are prioritizing to the people who are directly reporting to them.
That's good.
And so it can't just be, well, I don't want the volunteers to burn out, but I'm okay with my staff burning out. It has to be something that you care through the entire depth of the organization. Otherwise, you end up with staff who are simply perpetuating what it is that you are leading them to do. Staff are going to duplicate the conversations that you have. They're going to duplicate how much you care about this. If you have a staff person who comes to you and says, I have this thing going on with my family, if your response is, fine, but get your work done, that's how they are going to lead the volunteers. Because really, the staff are, in many cases, I don't want to say they're volunteers because they're not volunteers, but we will get into this a little bit more in just a second. But we need to recognize that if we are not paying them at a certain level, or even if we are paying them the exact same amount that they could make somewhere else, but the amount that they're carrying emotionally and mentally is much greater because of what it is that we're trying to do, that weighs differently. And we need to make sure that we are caring about them as if they were volunteers too.
Absolutely. Now, it's really, really important to remember that these volunteers, they need leaders that understand how to treat them well. And as the leader at the top of organization, you are modeling that to your staff. Whatever way that you lead is the way that they're automatically going to lead, just like Lisa was saying. I heard it said once before in slightly more crass terms, crap rolls downhill. And if you are at the top of an organization cracking the whip and being a leader that is super intense with your staff, that crap is going to roll downhill and it's going to hit your volunteers. If you're if you're seeing a lot of burnout and a lot of turnover in your volunteers because of burnout, a really good place to look first is how are you leading the people who are leading them?
Now, early signs, they're not that hard to find. First of all, look at the most common areas that are high stress in people's lives: moving, marriage, divorce, death, baby coming,
Big
and
changes. Yeah.
big changes, someone sick. Those big things where stress happens, as soon as you hear about it, that is an early sign that there is a huge window for burnout to happen in the next 90 days. So, as soon as you hear that this thing is coming up or this thing has happened, your response right there is going to determine the likelihood of burnout happening, the way that you address that. Another great way to start knowing about early signs is simply figuring out people's general personality traits, whatever you prefer to use. If it's the disc profile, the Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs, anything that like you find to be helpful if you understand. If you have a very base knowledge, I'm not saying dive in and understand everything about it, but let's say you just learned a little bit about the Enneagram and you know how the key people that are talking to you on a regular basis, what they look like when they're healthy and how they act when they're stressed. If you can start seeing those early signs, you can begin to catch stuff before it becomes an actual issue. Let's address stuff early enough so that we're not having to have the burnout conversation, but we can have the, you seem a little bit stressed and it's been a couple days now conversation, because that conversation is so much easier to have. So much easier.
Yeah, that conversation is way more of a communication of care instead of the, hey, you're not, like, something bad is happening, right? Because if someone flies off the handle and gets really angry, they're beyond burnout at that point, and you can't really have as easy of a care conversation with them. Now you're having to have like a coaching or a hard conversation with them. So figure out how to organize your structures so that way you can recognize early warning signs of burnout and address them early on. That way you can care for your volunteers through stuff.
Yep.
Number 2, remember that they are there voluntarily.
Yeah.
Your volunteers are there voluntarily. If you can remember that they are choosing to be there, they could have been somewhere else, but they chose to put that thing aside to be there with you, helping your organization do what it does. If you keep that top of mind, you're going to have a different lens through which the way that you treat them, the way you talk to them, the way the stuff that you give them to do, and the way that you thank them and appreciate them. Just remembering that they don't owe you anything. You owe them everything. like you owe them. They do not owe you, and you do not own them. You know, they are there by choice.
Yeah.
Side note, this is the same for your staff as well, for employees. They're there by choice. They could do something else.
Yep.
In a lot of cases, they could probably go earn more money doing a very similar job somewhere else. They're choosing to say no to something to be there with you. Do not take that for granted. Instead, keep that top of mind and let that inform your decisions about how you run your organization.
Yep. We've had conversations with former nonprofit staff who have gone into a for-profit business doing a similar role, making way more money. And the thing that they say to us is not, I'm making so much more, or the work is whatever, but it's just, I didn't realize I can make money without feeling stressed all the time. I didn't realize how nice it was to go to work and not carry with me all of these other big things. And what a lot of times they end up doing is going and like getting involved or volunteering or doing something else on the side because they still care. I think we lie to ourselves as nonprofit leaders when we say no one would ever want to go into for-profit work because they work here because they know they're making a difference. That is not why they work there. I mean, it is why, but when they quit, it's not always like oh man, I should really go back because there I was making a difference. A lot of times it's a sense of relief that they aren't having to carry the weight of the issue anymore. And so when we treat people as if you are here because this is what you are obligated to do, your internal, like wanting to do good in the world makes it and demands that you stay with our organization rather than go somewhere else. We end up treating people in a way that almost comes across like they owe us their loyalty. They owe us their time. They owe us their best talents. They owe us all of their skills. And they do not. Every single interaction that you have with a volunteer or a staff member is their opportunity to once again pick up their role and say, yep, I'm choosing it another day, or to look at it and say, I decline the offer. I'm on my way out. And we have to be aware of that. We have to be so careful of that, especially in nonprofit work where so much of it is about trust in leadership, trust in the organization, and trust in the cause.
Right. Now, we've talked about on our podcast a few times about how we don't really super like the word burnout because it's kind of a smokescreen for other stuff that's going on in an organization. It's an easy thing to say. It's much easier to say, I'm feeling really burnt out in my role than it is to say, my leader is a jerk. And like, I know it's kind of funny, but it's true.
No,
like,
it's totally
it's way
true.
easier, and it's almost like it's just sort of like a cheater way of saying something worse is happening, but I don't want to get into that, or I don't want to make this awkward. So I'm just gonna say I'm having some burnout,
Yeah.
rather than saying my coworker, I hate they smell terrible. Like it can the word burnout covers a lot of different stuff and ends up being a smokescreen. So it's really important that as you're having conversations with volunteers about burnout, that you're really trying to create an environment where they trust you enough to tell you what's actually going on, so that way you can fix it. Because I would say about half the time, or maybe even more, that burnout comes up, they're actually not feeling burnt out. They just don't know how to navigate awkward situations. And so it's just easier to say, I'm feeling burnt out, I need a break. And then they just kind of like ghost and kind of distance themselves.
I think, yeah, because with staff, they don't really want to bring up the awkward thing because, they're there for something bigger than themselves. And that's talked about so much that sometimes they'll put their own personal, whatever it might be, on the shelf for a while and just say, you know what, the cause is worth it. I'll put my head down and I'll deal with it until it finally gets to a place where it can't even be addressed because they've dealt with it for too long. The same thing happens with volunteers where they're like, how do I even bring this up? Like, I don't want to bring up that I don't like a leader here or I don't like how I'm being talked to. I am a volunteer. Like, I am the lowest position in this hierarchy. I don't even know how to bring it up. It's just easier to disappear. And then when someone asks, the word burnout is fantastic for people trying to leave because it can't be argued with. It's one of those words that it sounds like a really good reason. It sounds valid. And there's really no way for a leader to push back on the word without coming across like a complete jerk who doesn't care about the person. And so we need to be having those conversations on a regular basis and understanding that they are there voluntarily. They are with us voluntarily. And the way that we talk to them is going to determine how long that voluntary season is going to last.
Number 3, be realistic about expectations.
Yes.
Volunteers, like you said, they're there voluntarily, but usually they're doing this outside of their day job or their other responsibilities. They don't have 60 hours a week. They don't usually have a lot of like highly skilled technical ability that they're giving to the organization. A lot of times that is going to be reserved for people that are being hired for things, right? So don't expect them to do stuff that they do not have training to do. Don't expect them to do stuff that they have way more time to do or energy to do. Be realistic about what you're asking your volunteers to do. Still ask them, but then put it forward to them and then think about, is this a role for 1 volunteer or 15 volunteers?
Yes.
If it's a role for 15 volunteers, don't you dare put that on 1 volunteer because you are too weak to go out and find 14 more.
Ooh,
sorry, that was a little
you
mean.
just went there.
But it's true, though.
It's true, though.
If you have 1 volunteer and you have a job that takes 60 hours, I'm sorry, but it's up to you as the leader to go out and find more volunteers to make it doable so that 1 volunteer is not being crushed under the weight of the organization and the cause. Because here's the problem. They're going to feel super, super terrible if they can't pull it off because they care. They're there because they care. And if you put that weight on them, they're going to be carrying that. And that's going to lead to burnout really quickly.
Yeah. So I have 2 examples with this. One, I was talking to a volunteer at an organization who didn't have realistic expectations given to her. She ended up volunteering about 30 to 40 hours a week with the assumption, and it was kind of told to her, like, if you do this, there'll be a job for you, kind of dangled over her head. She volunteered in that organization for months, and worked outside of it too. And eventually, when it came to hire the position, they went with a different person. That kind of stuff is unacceptable. That is not a fair expectation to put on someone else. The potential of a job or a hiring or a placement down the road, if you're not going to execute on that and actually follow through on it, that is a huge issue. That's a huge integrity issue. And so we need to be careful with that. For another thing about expectations is understanding the difference between volunteer expectations and staff expectations. Across the board, we need to understand that the amount of work that needs to be done for any cause that needs help is going to be bigger than your organization can handle. And so we can't put all of the expectations on our people and not have realistic expectations about what we're going to be able to accomplish in the next 6 to 12 months or 5 years or 10 years and keep people within our organization, especially when we're working with volunteers. Years and years and years ago, I was volunteering in a position for an organization and I wanted to be done. I let my leader know I had some stuff going on personally and I needed to step out of the role. I let them know and I kind of gave a time frame. Generally when I'm volunteering, I'm like, I don't want to leave you hanging. I'm just giving you a heads up that this is happening. And nothing changed. And so I brought it up a second time and I said, hey, I need to step out. What's the thing? And they said, you are not allowed to step out until you've replaced yourself. And I looked at the leader and said, no, I'm a volunteer. I can step out whenever I want to. Respectfully, as my leader, I'm giving you a chance to replace me. And sometimes those expectations come from leaders who are just running so fast in so many directions that they don't even realize that what they're saying is illogical from a volunteer's perspective. From their perspective, they're like, well, you know, people, replace yourself. From my perspective, it's like, this is not my organization. No. like there's a reason I have to step out. I don't have hours to commit to bringing the next person in and training them and doing all the different pieces, especially in case I brought in a volunteer who wasn't a good fit for that leader. Like that doesn't even make sense. So it's something that we need to be, yeah, can you imagine? I bring in the wrong volunteer and the leader's like, you left me with a headache. How am I supposed to know? Like, I don't know what your needs are. I don't know where you're going next. I only know what my little role is, not even know if my role is going to be relevant in 6 months.
Right.
There's just a lot with it, and we need to be careful about the expectations that we unintentionally put on other people. So you might be at a spot where you're like, okay, I get it. Burnout is an issue. We also have a video that'll help on the other side of it called 6 Strategies to Growing a Healthy Team. So yes, we want to be on the lookout for burnout, find those signs early. At the same time, we can actually use strategy to grow healthy teams so that we are also doing the proactive part of it, not just looking out for the red flags, but also growing health for our organization. So we will see you over there.